Yeah, let's have a discussion on it because I think it's obviously it's a topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that to start, I think fear is such a powerful emotion. And the human need for safety is, again, one of the other most powerful emotions that we have. So, to me, and I don't know what you guys think about this, but reading through the timelines, not many people bring up the Spanish flu of 1918. And seemingly how right around that time, in the 20s particularly, we make use of phobias. I mean, do you guys think that could potentially have had something about why we were so easily ready to be manipulated, or maybe not manipulated is the wrong word, but buy into a story? And for a nation of immigrants, and give us you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, where did that message get lost?
The politicians took power.
Yeah, in a global nutshell, right? But
I think it always sounded good.
It
always sounded good to say, give us your tire report. But I still think there was always the thought that this is still just those who look like me that I'm talking about. And you can see that progress through politics as well. How when I'm looking at the different presidents and you say, oh, Jackson really wanted to take care of the white, poor people. He didn't really care about the others that were coming into the country. So it sounds great, but if you have no one to hold you accountable to the words that you're saying, because you're on the top, then it's like, all right, we did our job. It's pretty.
Yeah.
Now we can make use of the unknown, the fear of the unknown, and we can manipulate to make it still look like what we want.
Right.
That quote was perfect. I mean, it is giving us a release from what we're facing every time we walk out the door in every system that we exist in. And it's the one reprieve, that moment when I don't have to stress, I don't have to think about sleep, I don't have to think about what's going on outside. And yet it was funneled into our communities. So it's like you gave us something and then you said, and we're gonna lock you up for it.
Right.
And we're gonna make sure that it's a what, class 1. So if you're carrying it at all, let's go. That whole transition from slavery 1 to slavery 2. When you talk about the justice system. So it's still like, yeah, we know what could happen, but if the body only wants to be safe, then I'm going to look for everything I can that makes me feel safe and makes me feel good.
Right. But then it becomes a part of culture too, right? I mean, and if culture was, really born and bred out of communities and shared hardships, right? Even hip hop music, rap music becomes an idea of a release for struggle, right? And the history. And then that's stigmatized.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have access to certain schooling and education, that becomes stigmatized, right? But yet it's this whole entire negative feedback loop that just keeps perpetuating on itself, right? I mean, it's definitely very, very, very interesting.
Because I have done a little bit of reading in that respect, and I think there was another really kind of evil force that worked really well in favor of some of these people that wanted to do this, and that was capitalism. So it came down to the incredible utility of the hemp plant and how it could be used to make such durable materials. And that was the time that there was also the rise of companies like DuPont, which were making these new synthetic polymers and creating things. I've also read some information about paper, the paper industry. And so it was, there are a very few, small number of people, white men, making decisions about these things. And it's very easy in some cases for people to be manipulated by their friends who want to make money.
Yeah, that came to mind for me with the Hearst newspapers. He had a vertically integrated company. He owned the forests, he owned the mills, he produced the paper for his newspapers, and it was in his best interest to get rid of hemp as an alternative.
Yeah, I think often these underlying, the racial issues and these motivations, you can hide them underneath other things, and there's many layers to it, most of which are not in the general public's best interest.
Yeah. Well, I think it also helps shine a light away other problems, right? Like it diverts the attention away from you and potentially other people. Like Harry Anslinger, when the FBN, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, was running out of funding, that's when they decided to start targeting cannabis because of the growing use. It was just an easy target to say, hey, we still have a role. Don't fire us, continue to pay us. Don't disband my organization. And now, let me tell you this story of why it's so dangerous. Because it's associated with all these groups.
I think that's still part of the problem today.
Still part of the problem today. But what I find interesting is once the story is set, it's so hard to reverse it, right? And Anslinger was around multiple presidents, right? And at any one point in time, I mean, we have LaGuardia Report, we have the Schaefer Commission, we have all of these independent councils of people trying to say, hey, go and prove everything we're saying. Specifically, like with this purpose, right? Like, go and prove how bad this stuff is. And they come back empty-handed. And they're like, no, I got nothing.
Yeah, and not only empty-handed, but saying, hey, you know what? Your position is not supported by the evidence. And you're going to see when I describe the research history, completely ignored, which speaks to the power of a few individuals.
Yeah. And to just shift the problem, right? So interracial sex was a big issue in the 1920s and 30s, like, oh my God. But then Anslinger would reverse his course in the 50s, I think, and say, well, really, the real reason why we can't have Americans consume cannabis is they won't be able to identify communist spies, because we'd be all docile zombies, and then communism would take over. So even that guy's changing his stories based on need to continue the rhetoric of really something that was never even supported in the first place. So, pretty fascinating.
Can I share a personal
Please.
story, which is, it's a little bit off topic, but I think it takes us into another topic, and how I discovered cannabis. My father got in a pretty severe accident in the 80s, early 80s. He found that cannabis was the best thing for his pain. So we were growing it in the backyard. It was just a normal thing, right? Cooking it in the oven. I'm like 5, coming in. Well, he got caught doing this, right? And went to jail. We were in a small town. He was criminalized for this, right? But still in severe pain. I mean, he had fractured a lot of vertebrae in his spine. I don't even remember now. So he goes to the medical community and they put him on opioids, right? And so he becomes addicted to opioids, and then he can't get opioids anymore and moves to heroin. And so This was my life growing up, where this man for 5 to 10 years was this great person who used cannabis to, in the 80s to relieve his pain, and then switched to this totally new person because he was just criminalized in this. And that's kind of what I grew up with. And so I found that very interesting, how, during the 80s, it was just so criminalized, and just growing a few plants in your backyard and rolling up a joint for pain was, so I just find that interesting, and that can go anywhere, but it's just kind of a personal story that really connected me to cannabis, of like, oh, why this was such a great plant for a person. And then, so.
And that's a microcosm of the entire world. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, and Reagan, I forget the name of the gentleman, but there's a photo of Reagan from his administration when the Mothers Against Drunk Driving initiative came out. And he's sitting with, do you recall the name of the?
No, but I've heard similar.
So he's sitting with an African-American child who was injured very critically in this drunk driving accident. And he used this child as a poster for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So he takes a picture with him, and he's in his wheelchair, he's on a vent, and all these other things. And now, lo and behold, this child becomes an adult in chronic pain, and he becomes busted for carrying marijuana. He goes to the judge and is facing sentencing, and the judge basically was like, look, like, we understand that you're in pain, so you just have to promise not to use this anymore, and we'll let you go. And he said, no. He said, there's no way that I can live my life without this because I'm in constant everyday pain. Sends him to jail, and he dies in jail a few weeks later.
That gives me goosebumps.
Yeah,
That is crazy.
but I mean, it's just so reminiscent of your story too,
So
about
many
like how
stories.
How many stories are there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how many?
Yeah. So
So it kind of makes you angry in a way, you
Yeah.
know, when you hear these
Right.
stories of like how many people were robbed of their freedom just from, you know, power and money. And so, yeah. So thanks for stirring it up. I'm
Yeah.
ready for the rest of the day.